talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Saturday, February 25th, 2023, and this is our last free Black History Month lecture that I'm doing, online lecture that I'm doing, and this is part of a series, Black Resistance Movements in the Fight for Freedom, 1630 BC to 2023. We know that Black Resistance is the 2023 annual theme for African American History Month or Black History Month, okay? Can everybody hear me okay? I want to check that first, make sure you all can hear me all right. So we're going to jump right into this, and I have to teach a online class today at 2 p.m. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So that's an online class that just started up. Some of you all have heard about it. Some of you are enrolled in that class. We'll give you information also so you can enroll in that 12-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at our online school also. Okay, so that's not on Facebook or YouTube. That's at our online school. All right. If you missed any of the previous Black Resistance Movements lectures, you can go back and watch those. We have them archived here also. And I'm going to jump right into this. Let's see, we're going to post the information here so you can register for the online class today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I want to go ahead and jump into the content here today. Last class we talked about Queen Nzinga fighting against the Portuguese, and we talked about Ida B. Wells and how Ida B. Wells got involved. We talked about last class we talked about Queen Nzinga and Queen Nzinga fighting against the Portuguese. We talked about Ida B. Wells and Ida B. Wells getting involved in the anti-lynching movement. Today, I want to get to dealing with the Hyksos in ancient Kemet. Okay, we'll talk about the Hyksos in ancient Kemet. Also, we'll talk about the Black Exodus. Also, we'll talk about the Black Exodus of 1879. The Black Exodus of 1879, which was a resistance movement as well. And this involved about 6,000 African Americans migrating out to Kansas. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about that also. And then we're going to talk about the attack on voting rights, the historic attack on voting rights as well. You can post your questions here so we can get to your questions, cover as much information as we can. I just posted the link here for the information dealing with the 12-week online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we'll do a brief overview of that class, also give you information about that as well. Okay. All right. Let's look at this here. So let's look at some information dealing with the Hyksos, and Britannica.com has some information right now, has some good information right now dealing with that. Let me go to this article here. We know that we've heard about the Hyksos being invaders in ancient Kemet. They ruled for about 103 years or so. And I have a slide on this also. In Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder, the Hyksos, he talks about the Hyksos also. Let me go to the, first I want to go to this couple of slides I have dealing with this topic. Let's pull up the PowerPoint presentation. Right here. All right. Hyksos dynasty of Palestinian origin that ruled northern Egypt, northern Kemet, as the 15th dynasty. So 1630 BCE, before the Common Era, to 1523 BCE. The name Hyksos was used by the Egyptian historian Manetho, who flourished around 300 BCE, before the Common Era, who, according to the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, translated the word Hyksos. Manetho translated the word Hyksos as king shepherds. You may hear king shepherds, or you may hear shepherd kings, okay, or captive shepherds. Now, Josephus himself wished to demonstrate the great antiquity of the Jews, and thus identified the Hyksos with the Hebrews of the Bible. Thus identified the Hyksos with the Hebrews of the Bible. Now, the Hyksos, in fact, probably, the word Hyksos was in fact probably an Egyptian term for rulers of foreign lands, rulers of foreign lands. And it almost certainly designated the foreign dynasties rather than an ethnic group. Now, modern scholarship has identified most of the Hyksos names as Semitic names. The rise of the Hyksos kings in Kemet was made possible by an influx of immigrants from Palestine, into Kemet, or Egypt, beginning around the 18th century BCE, before the Common Era, or BC. The immigrants brought with them new technologies, including the horse and chariot, the compound bow, and improved metal weapons. Most of them settled in the eastern portion of the Nile Delta, where they achieved a dominant role in trade with Western Asia. So there's been new research in the last 3 or 4 years or so that have talked about the Hyksos as an immigrant group, as opposed to them being invaders. Okay, they were a immigrant group in Kemet. All right, because years ago they said they were invaders into Egypt. So if we look at this here from, I'm going to go to the article from Britannica.com. Then I want to look at an article from 2020 from science.org as well, that talks about the immigrant uprising. If we go to this one right here, let me flip over to this just a second here. All right, can I close up this ad? All right, now I want to go to, we left off right here. All right, so most of them settled in the eastern portion of the Nile Delta, where they achieved a dominant role in trade with Western Asia. Now, archaeological excavations in that area have revealed a Canaanite-style temple, Palestinian-type burials, including horse burials. Now, Palestinian types of pottery, quantities of their superior weapons, and a series of Minoan frescoes that demonstrate stylistic parallels to those of Knossos and Thera. The most prominent settlement was Avaris, a fortified camp over the remains of a Middle Kingdom town in the northeastern Delta. Their chief deity was the Kemetic or Egyptian storm and desert deity, or Neter, Seth, whom they identified with a Syrian storm god, Hadad. Seth. Okay, I should say. Now, the sequence of events that brought the Hyksos kings to power in Lower Kemet or Lower Egypt is not entirely clear. The 13th and 14th dynasties, which had existed concurrently in Lower Kemet, weakened and disappeared in about the middle, around the middle of the 17th century. Now, some scholars have suggested that a famine in the Delta region contributed to their decline and opened the way for the emergence of the Hyksos dynasty. From Avaris, the Hyksos 15th dynasty ruled most of Lower Egypt and the Nile Valley as far as the Kusay near present-day Asut. The contemporaneous 16th dynasty rulers, minor Hyksos kings who ruled in Upper Egypt, simultaneously with those of the 15th dynasty, were probably vassals of the later group. Now, when under, let me see, hold on, where do I want to go? Just a second, let me look at my notes here. Okay. When under Sequanera and Kamos, the Thebans began to rebel, the Hyksos pharaoh Apophis tried unsuccessfully to make an alliance with the rulers of Cush, who had overrun Lower Nubia or Ta-Nehesi, Lower Nubia in the latter years of the 13th dynasty, so 1650 BCE, Common Era, before the Common Era, I should say. Hold on, I just hit something. I clicked on the link. We need to go back. Okay. Now, the Theban revolt spread northward under Kamos, and about 1521, Avaris fell to his successor, Nesubiti or Pharaoh Amos, founder of the 18th dynasty, thereby ending 108 years of Hyksos rule over Egypt. Although vilified in some Egyptian texts, the Hyksos had ruled as pharaohs and were listed as legitimate kings in the Turin Papyrus. At least superficially, they Egyptianized, at least superficially, they were Egyptianized and did not interfere with Egyptian culture beyond the political sphere. All right. So, recently, last few years, there have been articles that talk about them being immigrants coming into Kemet as opposed to foreign invaders. Now, there was I want to look at two sources here. There's one from National Geographic dealing with Nesubiti Amos. But this article here from science.org, this deals with invasion of ancient Egypt may have actually been immigrant uprising. This is from July 15th, 2020. And let me go to this. Article here. Let's see. Let's pull this one up. All right. Let me just bring this one up here. Invasion of ancient Egypt. Immigrant uprising. Okay, this article right here. From science.org. Okay, so this is from July 15th, 2020. Let me zoom in on here. So ancient Egypt's first foreign takeover may have actually been an inside job. About 3,600 years ago, the pharaohs or Nasubiti briefly lost control of northern Egypt to the Hyksos, rulers who looked and behaved like people from an area stretching from present-day Syria in the north to Israel in the south. The traditional explanation is that the Hyksos were an invading force, but a fresh analysis of skeletons from the ancient Hyksos capital suggests an alternative. The Hyksos were Egyptian-born members of an immigrant community that rose up and grabbed power. Okay, let me zoom in on this a little bit more. Now, the pharaohs ruled Kemet from about 3100 BC to 30 BC, but they were not always in complete command of their territory. One period of vulnerability began around 1800 BCE, before the Common Era, with a succession of ineffectual pharaohs who struggled to maintain order. The Hyksos took advantage of the power vacuum by seizing control of northern Kemet, according to ancient texts, leaving the pharaohs in charge of only a tiny strip of land to the south. Now, archaeologists know the Hyksos were unlike typical Egyptians. They had names like those of people from the neighboring region of Southwest Asia. Ancient artwork depicts them wearing long, multicolored clothes, unlike normal Egyptian white attire, but exactly who they were has been unclear. Now, the pharaohs later claimed the Hyksos were foreign invaders who took northern Kemet by force and brought disorder and chaos. But some historians say this was simply ancient Egyptian propaganda. In the 1940s, researchers identified the ancient Hyksos capital city of Avaris at a site in the Nile Delta, about 120 kilometers northeast of Cairo. In the new study, archaeologist Chris Stantis at Bournemouth University and her colleagues analyzed teeth taken from skeletons buried at Avaris to get a clearer picture of who the Hyksos really were. As teeth form in childhood, tiny quantities of strontium metal in food are incorporated into the enamel. By comparing, let me flip it. Okay, just want to make sure we were still connected. By comparing the balance of strontium isotopes in enamel with those in the region's soil, researchers can judge where an individual grew up. Now, when Chris Stantis and her colleagues examined teeth from 36 skeletons buried at Avaris during the 350 years before the Hyksos seized power, they discovered that 24 of the individuals, both male and female, were foreign born. They could not tell where the foreigners hailed from, but the researchers say their findings show Egypt had welcomed immigrants for hundreds of years before the Hyksos rose to power. Okay, researchers say their findings show that Egypt had welcomed immigrants for hundreds of years before the Hyksos rose to power. Now, data from the teeth of a further 35 people buried at a virus during the Hyksos period show a similar pattern of immigration continued after they rose to power. All right, and just give me a second here. I'm trying to respond to a message. Somebody's trying to log in. Where did that go? All right, hold on. All right. Now, as such, Chris Stanton suggests that Hyksos rulers were not necessarily foreign-born invaders, but instead have emerged from a centuries-old immigrant community living in a virus. Her team reports today in PLOS 1. Now, historian and archaeologist Anna Latifa Murad at Macquarie University University thinks this conclusion makes sense. Archaeologists have found little evidence for the fighting and destruction that should have occurred at a virus if the city had been captured by foreign invaders. Egyptologist Orly Goldwasser at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem thinks most of the immigrants probably traveled to Egypt in peace. They may even have invented the alphabet once they arrived, according to her research. Okay, I'm not sure which alphabet she's referring to, but all right. Now, their rise to power is probably explained by the failings of the pharaohs to control the area, says Egyptologist John Darnell at Yale University. The Hyksos ruled for 100 years, about 108 years, and then the pharaohs recaptured their territory. Now, researchers have speculated that the pharaonic forces banished the Hyksos rulers to Southwest Asia, and that the punishment may have helped inspire Exodus, the biblical story in which the Israelites left Egypt and eventually reached the Promised Land in Southwest Asia. Okay, now let me give my disclaimer. If you've seen any of my presentations before, you've seen any of my lectures, anything like that, you've taken any of my online courses, you know I usually say this in the beginning. Now, I may say some things that are outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Just because they disagree with it or don't like it does not mean that it's not true. It just means you have to do some more research to understand what I'm talking about. All right? Because, so I learned this from one of my teachers, Dr. Ray Hagins, and I used to say something like this when I talk about controversial information: the space inside this circle represents my realm of knowledge, because I usually have people put their fingers together to form a circle. The space inside this circle represents my realm of knowledge. Everything that I think I know about whatever I think I know is represented within the circumference of this circle. I must keep in mind that there are still things to know that exist outside the circumference of my own awareness. So just because you know everything that you know about what you know does not mean you know everything there is to know about what you know. There's still things that exist outside of the circumference of your own awareness. Okay, and I'll come to that. I'm going to come to that in just a second. I'm going to show you some additional information here. I'll show you that. And let me pull this up here. Because when I do my presentation dealing with Easter, we talk about it there. But I know we have some people joining us, some additional people joining us as well. So how's everybody doing today? Be sure to register for the new 12-week online class that I teach on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, hold on just a second. This is freezing up. All right, I want to go right here. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Because we're teaching, this class just started up, and we're teaching class number 2 today at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so we have the information around the homepage of our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And we take you through our history. We look at this history chronologically. We look at thousands of years of history, and we look at the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt into Europe, and this brings Europe out of the Dark Ages. It's going to be to our detriment, because everything we taught Europeans came back to kick us in the behind. Okay, but we have this information there. And then on Sunday, February 26th, we have class number 1 of the second class that I teach, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1800 to 1968. Okay, that's 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do these sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Okay, the second class picks up where the first one leaves off. So we get deep into this history and look at what happened to us after slavery ended. What were the laws and policies put into place? Why did Reconstruction end in 1877? We deal with the Civil War, Jim Crow era, Great Migration, 1915, 1970, World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement, to go in and do a deep dive into that 168, 170 year period of history that brings us directly to where we are today, so we can better understand what happened to us after slavery ended, so we understand where we need to go from here. And we have a bundle pack, so you get both classes on sale for $120. It's regularly it's about a $300 value. The 5 of my lectures that you get free, that'll be uploaded into the school as well, the video library. Okay, so I just posted a link here for the first class, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade. We'll post a link here also for the bundle pack. And then for returning students, if you've taken any of our online courses in the past, you paid for any of our online courses in the past, you get a 50% discount on the bundle. So email us at ahnshow@theafricanhistorynetwork.com, ahnshow@theafricanhistorynetwork.com for returning students. And you get 50% off. Okay. And then we'll get you enrolled in that. You can join us in class today. All right. Let's go back to this. So when I talk about Passover, and when we talk about Easter, let me rephrase that. When we talk about Easter, there's a article from history.com, official website of the History Channel, that deals with the Passover holiday, and it talks about Easter, the origins of Easter, things of this nature. Okay, it's a really, really good article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. It's called Passover. Okay, this is from last updated February 15, 2023. So it goes through and it deals with the biblical story, the story in the Helios Biblos, the Sun book, the Holy Bible. Helios is in reference to sun. biblos in reference to book. So it goes through and deals with that story, which the story appears in Hebrew Bibles, books of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay. So you go through and read the story that you were taught in Sunday school and the story that the pastor talks about, and you read all of that. Okay. But then you go down and you get to this part here. Now, this is the most important part of the entire article. All right. Most important part of the entire article. Questions of historical accuracy. Questions of historical accuracy. Okay. And what it says now, this is not attacking anybody's religious beliefs, but we should ask the question, how should I put this delicately? We should ask the question, where do those religious beliefs come from? How were they formed? Who did they come from? Okay? This is not attacking anybody who's a Christian or one of the denominations of Christians or anything like this. But this information here, your pastor, your minister, your bishop probably is not going to talk about this. Questions of historical accuracy. So it goes on to say, for centuries, FOR, for centuries, scholars have been debating the details and historical merit of the events commemorated during the Passover holiday. Despite numerous attempts, historians and archaeologists have failed to corroborate the tale, T-A-L-E, the tale of the Jews' enslavement in and mass exodus from Egypt. Now, see, we have to just pause right here, because if you are an African American Christian, you grew up hearing these stories about the mass exodus and the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, and they were treated brutally in the evil Pharaoh and things like this. Usually, and so we saw 10 Commandments. Now, I could tell you personally, when I was a kid, I was Catholic. Not because I chose to be Catholic, because my parents were Catholic. Okay? Because when my mom married my dad, my mom was Baptist from Tennessee. My dad's family was from Mississippi. My dad's family became Catholic for whatever reason. They're both black. Okay? Both African American. So when she married my dad, she had to take Catholic religious classes to convert to Catholicism. All right. So I grew up up until the time I was 13 years old. I grew up, Catholic. So we went to a predominantly white Catholic church. It was about 75% white. St. Luke Catholic Church here in Detroit. They closed St. Luke some years ago. And sat on Saturday morning. So in Catholic church, in Catholicism, you didn't have Sunday school. You had Saturday catechism classes, which was like Sunday school. So we would go Saturday morning, and we're learning about the Bible and all these religious figures, and the white nuns are teaching us these stories. And we learn about the children of Israel and the evil Pharaoh and things like this. Now, they didn't tell us the name of the Pharaoh. And I remember on Easter time, when we would go to Easter Mass, I know right around that time, maybe the night before or something, right around that time, they would show the 10 Commandments on TV. Okay, Yul Brynner as the Pharaoh Ramses, and all this stuff, right? So this programmed us that the Egyptians were evil, Because in church, they ain't teach us anything positive about Egypt, generally speaking. Okay? Usually what you get in church in reference to Egypt is coming from the Bible, unless you have like maybe an African-centered, Afro-centered pastor who's bringing in like historical information about Egypt. We ain't get nothing positive about Egypt in the Catholic Church. Okay? So when you go do the historical and archaeological research, what they're explaining to you here in this article from the History Channel is that there's no evidence, there's no historical evidence, there's no archaeological evidence of Jews ever being enslaved in Egypt, and there's no evidence of a mass exodus of Jews from Egypt either, or Hebrews from Egypt. Now, this is not anti-Semitic. You got a problem, go talk to the History Channel. We're dealing with understanding history and archaeological evidence. Now, they go on to say, although the ancient Egyptians kept thorough records, no mention is made of an Israelite community within their midst or any calamities resembling the 10 biblical plagues. Because when you go research this, now you can believe what you want to believe. But see, world history and religious literature are two entirely different things. And one of the things that's confusing to many people when it comes to Christianity, especially for African Americans, because we've been stripped largely of our history, culture, language, spiritual systems, names, folklore, mores, nationalities, and we've been taught to see reality through the eyes of Europeans. So studying this type of history, studying African history, is black resistance, because it's contrary to what the dominant theme is, the dominant narrative is. All right. So what they're talking about also are the 10 biblical plagues. There's no evidence that ever took place. Now, you can believe what you want to believe. But see, world history and religious literature are two entirely different things. World history is what actually happened. Religious literature is in religious literature books. World history is in world history books. What's confusing for especially a lot of African Americans is that when you read the Helios Biblos, the Sun Book, the Holy Bible, which deals with the travel of the sun throughout the constellations and the stories associated with that. When you read about stories that took place in Rome and Egypt, Israel, things like this. Okay, so you say, oh, well, these are real places, right? It's not like it took place in Neverland. Okay, it's not like it took place in Neverland. These are real places. So because they're dealing with real countries or real geographic areas of the world, then people just automatically believe that then the stories that are told about those areas are true, because it's in the Helios Biblos, the Holy Bible. But when you go and do the historical research and the archaeological research, there's a huge problem. Okay, although ancient Egyptians kept thorough records, no mention is made of an Israelite community within their midst, or any calamities resembling the 10 biblical plagues. There's also no evidence of large encampments in the Sinai Peninsula, the fabled site of the Jews wandering, or any sudden, now check this out, because see, you can write a story, but there are ecological footprints that if your story is actually true, or you're going to be able to go verify this. There's also no evidence of any sudden fluctuation in Israel's archaeological record that would indicate the departure and return of a large population. You leave archaeological and ecological footprints. If you had 1 million people or 800,000 or 500,000 people wandering in the desert for 40 years, it's going to throw off the whole ecology of the desert. They'll still be digging up bones today. What did 1 million people eat in the desert for 40 years, or wherever they were wandering, wherever you want to put them wandering? What did they eat for 40 years? Where did they get water from for 1 million people? Where did they get clothes from for 1 million people? What did they do with their dead? It's the same thing with it's the same thing with well, we ain't gonna get into that. We're not gonna get into Noah's Ark. That's a whole nother lecture. But so you have to understand there are archaeological and ecological footprints. If you have 1 million people leave a country, there's going to be a lasting impact from that. And then there's going to be a lasting impact of where they went through to get to the country that they went into. So you can write a story, but whether you like it or not, there's going to be lasting evidence if that story actually took place. All right, so there's also no evidence of large encampments in the Sinai Peninsula, the fabled site of the Jews wandering, or any sudden fluctuation in Israel's archaeological record that would indicate the departure and return of a large population. A handful of scholars, including the first century Jewish historian Josephus, who we talked about a few minutes ago, have suggested a link between the Israelites and the Hyksos, okay, as referenced in the briefly in the article from science.org. The Hyksos are mysterious Semitic people, possibly from Canaan, who controlled Lower Egypt for more than 100 years before their expulsion by Pharaoh Amos during the 16th century BC. Most modern academics, however, have dismissed this theory due to chronological conflicts and a lack of similarity between the two cultures. Oh, the other thing is, I know you have some people who say that the Jews, while they were the Hebrews, while they were there in Kemet, they built the pyramids. I know people like to say this. They stopped in ancient Kemet. They stopped building pyramids about 900 years before the Hebrews were said to have come into Kemet. Also, we dealt with this. Professor Kabahai Watha Kamene and I dealt with this in the. There's an interview I did with him. It's on my YouTube channel. We did it here in Detroit about 2015, and people who study history know this. It's Tony Browder has talked about this. The ancient Egyptians stopped building pyramids about 900 years. They stopped building pyramids in the 6th dynasty, which is somewhere around 2500 BC, something like that. They stopped building pyramids about 900 years before the Hebrews were said to have come into Egypt. So, okay. You can read this entire article. This is at history.com. It's called Passover. Dealing with, because we're coming up on the time of the year coming up on the time of the year when you're going to see the 10 Commandments on TV. And people are going to talk about the evil Pharaoh and the Egyptians were evil and all this stuff. Okay, so the Hyksos ruled for 100 years, and then the pharaohs recaptured their territory. Researchers have speculated that the Pharaonic forces banished the Hyksos rulers to Southwest Asia, and that the punishment may have helped inspire Exodus, the biblical story in which the Israelites left Egypt and eventually reached the Promised Land in Southwest Asia. Ultimately, even though the Hyksos may only have ruled for about 100 years, they appear to have left their mark on world culture. So read this article here from science.org. Invasion of ancient Egypt may have actually been immigrant uprising. We'll post the link here. All right. Okay, let's see here. I'm a retired Andrea. I'm a retired Black Studies teacher. My degree, Bachelor's of Arts, Master's in Sociology and Anthropology. Grew up an activist in Philly. I went to Catholic college. Everything you say, I've studied. Talk about police reform laws. We must boycott. The History Channel said that the one upright man coming from a monkey was African. History Channel many times didn't give us a true fact. Okay. All right. Talk about police reform. I've done that numerous times on the African History Network show and on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Because we don't understand how to get what it is we say we want. This is why I said you need to take the name George Floyd off the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and rename it the Law and Order, the Law and Order Justice and Policing Act, because every year more white people are shot and killed by police than African Americans, but very few people are talking about that. And when you look at the database from the Washington Post called Fatal Force, which keeps track of police killings each year, when you look at it, it tells you that 50% of the people killed by police each year are white. And every year, there are more white people killed by police than African Americans. If you want to get a police reform bill passed, and the majority of the people who have to vote on that bill look like the majority of the people who are being killed, then why would you keep talking about black this and black that? Why wouldn't you talk about the white people who are unjustly being shot and killed by police? It takes 218 votes to get a bill passed in the House of Representatives. It takes 60 votes to get a bill passed in the U.S. Senate, unless it's dealing with judges, or unless you can get it through the budget reconciliation process, which means you need a simple majority, which is 51, which is how they got the American Rescue Plan passed, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan in 2021, and no Republicans voted for the bill. 95% of the Senate is white. There's only 2.5 African Americans in the Senate, and I say half because Senator Tim Scott, Black Tea Party Republican from South Carolina, half the time he doesn't act like he's black. One, two, he was the one who blocked the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the Senate in the first place. Because when it passed the House of Representatives in March of 2021 by a vote of 220 to 212, 212 Republicans voted against the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And now those domestic terrorists and coup plotters and coup plotter sympathizers, they've taken over the House of Representatives. So it's going to be even harder to get the bill passed in the House when it actually passed before, when Democrats had control of the House in March of 2021. So anytime you're a minority population and you're trying to get a bill passed, and the majority of the benefits of the bill will help you, but the majority of the people who have to vote for the bill don't look like you. You need to link the benefits of the bill with the majority of the people who have to vote for the bill. This is just basic understanding win-win situations, understanding negotiations. This is just basic understanding negotiations. Keep talking about black this, black that, policing black bodies, things like that. There's a lot of white people that want black bodies policed. You think you're going to get that bill passed with Kevin McCarthy in charge of the House and Jim Jordan of Ohio, who's chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and just a couple weeks ago He was on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and said he doesn't think any bill could be passed that would prevent Tyree Nichols from being killed. And all the Republicans in the House voted against the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We don't understand that we don't understand. The methods that they're using to get these bills passed are not going to work because you don't understand how to even speak the language of the majority of the people who have to vote on those bills. You should be, one, change the name of the bill to the Law and Order Justice and Policing Act. Why Law and Order Justice and Policing Act? Because Donald Trump talked about law and order when he ran in 2016, and Richard Nixon ran on the platform of law and order in 1968, and he ran as a backlash to the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, the rebellions taking place across the country. And law and order means protect white people and lock up African Americans. Flip the script on them, because you got to get 10 Republicans in the Senate to vote for the bill, because they're not going to do a carve out for the bill to the filibuster. You're going to need 9 Republicans. There's 51 Democrats. You need 9 Republicans to vote for the bill. How you going to get them to vote? No, you need to bring crying white mothers into House of Representatives hearings and U.S. Senate hearings and hold up pictures of their children who were shot and killed by police unjustly shot and killed by police. You need to bring in the Fraternal Order Police and the International Association of Police Chiefs and have them talk about why they actually supported the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, because they put out a joint statement in September 2021 which stated that their joint support for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, after Tim Scott went out and lied and said that he said the sticking point in the bill was defund the police. The bill does not defund the police. The bill actually spends millions or more dollars per year on policing. The bill does not. If anybody thinks the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act defunds the police, I mean, well, first, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. Defund the police means different things to different people. It's a much more. It takes a holistic approach to policing. It's a much more common sense approach to policing. But it spends millions of dollars more on policing. There was I ain't planning to talk about this, but there was an article. I've dealt with this before. There was an article from thehill.com. It's an article from thehill.com that dealt with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, when Senator Tim Scott went out and lied in September 2021 after the talks broke down between he and Senator Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass. I'm trying to find that. Piece here. Hold on. Because I hear all the activists and experts and stuff like that talking about getting the bill passed. None of them just explain to you what I just explained. Which is why it's not going to get passed, because I'm going to say this as delicately as I can. Most of them don't know what the hell they're doing. That's why and nobody just explained it to you what I just explained. There was one, let me see here. Hill.com. It was, man, what was that? I just had that article because I needed it. It was one of the shows I was on, and I needed it, and it was supposed to go back in my file folder so I could find it, but I don't know. Time is going on. I got to get back to the topic here. But check that out. It was Senator Tim Scott. So September, right around September 28th, 2021, the talks broke down for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And the police unions put out a joint statement saying that they supported the Fraternal Order Police and the International Association of Police Chiefs. They put out a joint statement saying that they supported the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. You want to bring them into the Senate and the House and have them talk about why they support the bill and why the bill is so good and how it helps protect citizens as well as police. Okay, I can't find it now. I have to move on to find it later. All right. Post your questions here dealing with history because we got to move on, run out of time. I have to teach a class today, too. In addition to this, I have to teach a 2-hour class. Call into my radio show Sunday night with that question. Okay. So, quickly here, I want to talk about the Black Exodus of 1879. The Black Exodus of 1879 out of Kansas. Let me grab this. I was trying to find there's an article I was trying to find on that before we came on. But what happened was there's a good article from the National Park Services about this. So after Reconstruction ends in 1877, you have African Americans who are still trying to acquire land. They're looking for a better way of life. And you're going to have about 6,000 of them migrate out to Kansas, okay, Kansas territory, because they're trying to escape segregation. They're trying to escape domestic terrorism. You're shifting towards Jim Crow laws, and they're trying to escape racism, etc. Okay, this is before Plessy versus Ferguson, U.S. Supreme Court case. 1896. This is before then. This is before poll taxes in Florida began in 1889. This is before the Tennessee state legislature segregates public transportation and streetcars, things like this. That's 1881. Okay, this is 1879. So if we look at this article here from National Park Service dealing with exodusters, which is one of the names of these people who are migrating, and this is a movement of Black resistance as well. And also, I just posted the information here for PayPal and Cash App. So for the online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding Transatlantic Slave Trade, if you want to pay for that through Cash App. We just posted a Cash App link here, and it's on the homepage of our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com also. You can pay for it that way as well. And I'll give you some information about the class here, some more information about the class in a few minutes. We know with the Compromise of 1877, Republicans made a backroom deal with Democrats to allow Rutherford B. Hayes to become president. Neither Rutherford B. Hayes nor Samuel J. Tilden had enough electoral college votes to become president. So Republicans agreed that Rutherford B. Hayes will remove the remaining Union troops out of the South that were still protecting to a certain extent the rights of newly freed African Americans, okay? And he agreed to remove the remaining Union troops. They were in Florida, South Carolina, and there's one other state they were still in, okay? So this is the Compromise of 1877. Compromise of 1877. The Union troops had pulled out of the other states by this time, okay? And the Southern white supremacists were taking back control of the state legislatures. And okay, so what's going to happen is that the 1876 presidential, the 1878 statewide election in Louisiana, Democrats are going to take back control of the state legislature and the local government there. So you have African Americans who are fleeing from this, and they're primarily leaving from Louisiana and Texas, and they go out to Kansas. In 1879, an African American man from Louisiana wrote a letter to the governor of Kansas that read in part, "I am very anxious to reach your state, not just because of the great race now made for it, but because of the sacredness of her soil washed by the blood of humanitarians for the cause of black freedom." So remember, it was in Kansas in 1855 to 1859 that you have this armed conflict called Bleeding Kansas, where you had armed conflict between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. This is one of the things that leads to the Civil War taking place in 1861. And that was as a result, Bleeding Kansas was as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 that infuriated a lot of abolitionists. And what it did was it nullified basically what it did was it replaced the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 came about to organize the land that the U.S. got from the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. U.S. got 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre. And they kept a balance between free states and slaveholding states, okay? That's the Missouri Compromise. It allowed Missouri to come into the Union as a slaveholding state. It allowed Maine to come in as a free state, and it abolished slavery in all of the remaining territory. Okay, this is the Missouri Compromise. With the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, and I'm pulling up my my slideshow I'm pulling up my PowerPoint presentation dealing with from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, because that's where we get deep into this discussion here. With the Missouri Compromise of 1820, it abolished slavery in all the remaining territory. Okay. Now, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, what this did was it left up to those moving into the Kansas and Nebraska territories, it left up to them to decide whether or not they wanted to have slavery, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. Okay, and this was known as popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty. Okay, you leave it up to those inhabitants of those territories to determine whether or not they have slavery. So this allowed for the potential spread of slavery into these Western territories, which infuriated a lot of abolitionists at the time. Okay, now the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed over fierce opposition in Congress and signed into law in 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska and gave each territory the right to decide whether or not to permit slavery when it joined the Union. Now, Stephen Douglas believed that popular sovereignty, as the idea was known, would resolve the ongoing sectional debate between North and South and others, between North and South over slavery's extension into the territories. Okay, but it did not. So you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, you have the fall of Reconstruction. Then in 1878 in Louisiana, Democrats take back control of the state legislatures and local government. All right. So this caused thousands of African Americans to leave Louisiana as well as Texas and look for somewhere better to live, and they chose Kansas. Now, this man was not alone. Let's go back to the article. Thousands of African Americans made their way to Kansas and other Western states after Reconstruction. So Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. The Homestead Act of 1862 and other liberal land laws offered blacks in theory, the opportunity to escape the racism and oppression of the post-war South and become owners of their tracts of private farmland. For people who had spent their entire lives working the lands of white masters with no freedom or pay, the opportunities offered by these land laws must have seemed the answer to prayer. Many individuals and families were indeed willing to leave the only place they had known to move to a place few of them had ever seen. The large scale black migration from the South to Kansas came to be known as the Great Exodus. Now that exodus did happen. The great exodus. This exodus did happen. Okay. And those participating in it were called exodusters. Now, for the sake of time, I got to skip over some of this. I want to go right here. No, I want to go past that. Benjamin Pap Singleton. Okay. Benjamin Pap Singleton is mentioned in the executive summary of when it comes to this year's theme for Black History Month, which is Black migrations. All right. So many of the African Americans that migrated to Kansas prior to the 1879 exodus came from Tennessee. There, a popular movement sprang seemingly from nowhere in 1874, leading to a colored people's convention in Nashville, Tennessee, in May 1875. Many town promoters, including the notable Benjamin Pap Singleton, saw this convention as a way to convince people to migrate to Kansas. Now, the convention resulted in the designation of a board of commissioners to officially promote migration to Kansas. This board would later stipulate that would-be migrants needed at least $1,000 per family to relocate to Kansas. Very few interested in doing so had such funds. Nevertheless, many freed African Americans determined to leave Tennessee anyway. Promoters like Benjamin Pap Singleton became known as conductors and began leading African American families to Kansas. Obviously, black migration to Kansas did not begin or end with the Exodus of 1879. Thousands of free blacks made their way to Kansas throughout the decade of the 1870s. Since their migration was more gradual, however, few whites took notice. Few whites took notice. This was certainly not the case when the well-publicized Exodus took place in 1879. So let's look briefly here at the Exodus of 1879. Now, the great Exodus of 1879 of African Americans was largely influenced by the outcome of the 1878 elections in the state of Louisiana, in which the Democratic Party made major gains by winning several congressional seats and the governorship. Freed African Americans, who were largely Republican supporters, were coerced, threatened, assaulted, and even murdered to keep them away from the ballot box, to keep them away from voting. Now, when the final tallies were in and the Democrats claimed almost total victory, many black Louisianans knew that the time had come for them to abandon their state and join those already in Kansas. Now, Senator William Windom, a white Republican from Minnesota, introduced a resolution on January 16th, 1879, which actually encouraged black migration out of the South. Okay, now Senator, it was called the Windom Resolution. The Windom Resolution, together with Southern white bigotry and the letters, and newspaper articles of those blacks already in Kansas, led many Southern freed men and women to finally decide to make their ways to Kansas. By early 1879, the Kansas fever exodus was taking place. By early 1879, the Kansas fever exodus was taking place. Now, the 1879 exodus removed approximately 6,000 African Americans, primarily from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Many had heard rumors of free transportation all the way to Kansas, but they were sorely disappointed when they discovered that such a luxury did not exist. Very few, however, were dissuaded by this inconvenience. Now, many Southern whites had a racist. So this is the contradiction with a lot of the white supremacists, right? They despised African Americans, but they needed our labor. Many Southern whites had a racist and patronizing attitude about African Americans in general, and the Exodus in particular. As much as whites hated dealing with freed African Americans, they still wanted the former slaves there as a cheap labor force. So they despised us, but they wanted our cheap labor to enrich themselves, which was partly what slavery was about also. To maldistribute wealth, power, and resources into the hands of Europeans and exploit the labor of African Americans and exploit the at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. There were at least there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country because we dominated the skilled trades. This is why after slavery ended, after chattel slavery ends in 1865, this is why you see these major labor unions pop up. These major labor unions, like the National Labor Union founded in 1866 or the American Federation of Labor in 1875, they're designed largely to protect jobs of white men and lock African Americans out of these skilled trades, out of these jobs that we have been doing for free for 246 years, largely for free. The book, The Other Slaves, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen by James Newton and Ronald Lewis came out in 1978. And it goes through and it lays out at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts we had in this country. We were the anchor makers, the artists, the bakers, the barrel makers, the bartenders, the basket makers, beer makers, blacksmiths, bricklayers, brick makers, cabinet makers, cigar makers, cooks, coppersmiths, decorative furnishers. We were the fishermen, engineers, gardeners, hemp baggers, herb doctors, horse trainers, hunters, locksmiths. We were engineers, shipbuilders, all that. We were jockeys. This is why after slavery ended, you know, when the first Kentucky Derby ran in 1875, you know, 13 of the 15 jockeys were African-American jockeys. The first Kentucky Derby ran in 1875. The winner of the first Kentucky Derby, his name was Oliver Lewis. He was 19 years old and a former slave. His trainer's name was Ansel Williamson, or Ansel Williams, and he was a former slave. We dominated horse racing. But there was a organized effort by jealous white men who forced us out of horse racing because we were winning the Kentucky Derbies. We were winning all the major horse races. All right, let's go back to this here with the Exodus. How's everybody doing? How y'all like this type of information? Now, the class that I teach on Sunday that starts up Sunday, February 26th, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1800 to 1968. We get deep into this history, that 168-year period of history. That's a 12-week online course. So we get deep into that history, okay? Gilbert said, please mention that the Republican Party in the late 1870s. Yeah, there's a different Republican Party today because of well, first of all, the Republicans turned their backs on African Americans. So see Candace Owens and all these black grifter conservatives out here, what's his name? J. Philip Clay, that we talked to on Roland Martin Filter, that didn't know what the hell he was talking about when we were dealing with the killing of Tyree Nichols, okay? And you go watch that, black conservative J. Philip Clay. He hung up on the conversation before they could get to me because I was about to roast him also. But you have Republicans who turn their backs on African Americans, and even before that, when the Clinton, Mississippi riot of 1875 took place, and African Americans were calling for intervention, and some Republicans were calling for intervention from the federal government, from President Ulysses S. Grant, he refused to get involved in that. Whereas previously, in 1871, Ulysses S. Grant imposed martial law in 9 counties in South Carolina using the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which passed Congress, okay? Because and they were being prosecuted by the Department of Justice because the Department of Justice was created during Reconstruction in 1870, and the U.S. Department of Justice was created largely to protect the new rights of African Americans. This is where the Department of Justice comes from. That Merrick Garland is the head of today. Okay, the Department of Justice was created largely to protect African Americans. There's an article from Smithsonian.mag that deals with the Department of Justice and how they were formed. But also at justice.gov, they have information about that as well. They were formed in 1870. There was an attorney general prior to the Department of Justice being formed, but the Department of Justice was formed in 1870. This article right here, created 150 years ago, the Justice Department's first mission was to protect black rights. All right, and these online classes that I teach, you can register for any of these. Also visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. You can register for that, and we appreciate those who pay for these courses also, because this helps finance the research. This helps us stay on the air, keep broadcasting the African History Network show, keep be able to pay the bills, pay the services for this, because I'm broadcasting through Crowdcast right now. I have to pay for this. This is not free. And then when I teach the class on Learn World, okay, I got to pay for that also. When we use Learn World to house the classes, all this, so all these services cost money. Okay, this one right here. Created 150 years ago, the Justice Department's first mission was to protect black rights. In the wake of the Civil War, the government's new force sought to enshrine equality under the law. This is from SmithsonianMag.com, which is the official website of this is the magazine of the Smithsonian Institute. This article is from July 1st, 2020 by Brian Green, okay, and it goes through this history. Amos T. Ackerman was the first attorney general under the Department of Justice, okay? All right, so check out that article. All right, so as much as whites hated dealing with freed African Americans, they still wanted the former slaves there as a cheap labor force. Many Southern whites became so alarmed by the exodus that they began to pressure their elected officials to put a stop to the exodus, because they, En Vogue said, give it up, turn it loose. They couldn't give it up and turn it loose. They hated African Americans, but they wanted that cheap labor. They eventually succeeded, and a U.S. Senate committee met for 3 months in 1880 to investigate the cause of the exodus. The committee disintegrated into partisan bickering and accomplished little. Despite this, African Americans continued to leave for Kansas. By early March of 1879, about 1,500 had already passed through St. Louis en route to Kansas. Back in Mississippi and Louisiana, thousands more crowded onto riverbanks to wait for passing steamships, to give them passage to St. Louis. One white man stated that the banks of the Mississippi River were, quote, literally covered with colored people and their little store of worldly goods. Every road leading to the river is filled with wagons loaded with plunder and families who seem to think that anywhere is better than here. Now, once in St. Louis, many of the exodusters had little idea how to continue their flight with no resources. Some were so destitute that they could not feed themselves or their families. In response, St. Louis clergy, churches, and business leaders formed committees to assist the freed African Americans so that they could survive and make their ways to Kansas. Food and funds were collected from the local community as well as from sympathizers from Iowa to Ohio. Lack of shelter, however, became the most serious problem, and many African Americans were forced to sleep outside near the waterfronts to which the steamships had delivered. Care of the exodusters in St. Louis became a political issue. Care of the exodusters in St. Louis became a political issue, especially after the Democratic-leaning Missouri Republican began running anti-African-American stories. This is their newspaper. The Missouri Republican began running anti-African-American stories and tales of mishandling of donated funds. By the time the last of the exodusters parted St. Louis by rail, wagon, boat, or on foot, even the most sympathetic citizens were likely happy to see them go. Okay, read the rest of this piece here from the National Park Service under Homestead. This deals with the exodusters, and this deals with the Black Exodus of 1879, the Black Exodus of 1879 into Kansas. And they're coming from Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi primarily. Okay, how many people have never heard of the Black Exodus of 1879 prior to hearing me talk about it either today or previously? How many people have never heard of that? That's some of the type of information that we get deep into in the second class that I teach, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1800 to 1968. Okay, very quickly here, when we look at the attack on voting rights, that continues, and the same strategy that's needed to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed and take George Floyd's name off of it. There's no disrespect to George Floyd and the family. I've talked to Felonious Floyd, his brother. I've talked to him on Roller Martin Unfiltered. There's no disrespect to them. It's understanding the white people that you have to deal with to get that bill passed in the House and the Senate. Okay? Republicans are in control of the House of Representatives. It was 139 Republicans in January 2020, January 2021, voted not to certify the 2020 presidential election results. They voted not to certify the 2020 presidential election results that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won. And then you think they're going to vote for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and none of them voted for it in March of 2021 when only Democrats voted for that bill in the House of Representatives? No, that's not. You're in Neverland. You're not dealing with reality. So this is the article I want right here. Let's go to this one right here, right quick. And then we'll talk briefly of the content in my 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, how you all like this type of information? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like as well. Who still needs to register for these online classes? Who still needs to register for these online classes also? And you can post here and let me know which class you need to register for. And you can also email me. Here's the link once again for Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade. You can register for that right now. And we have the information on the homepage of our website. I'll post that link here. Okay, right there. All right. I want to look at this article. Okay, this is from history.com. This deals with how Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. how Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. Just stand by. This is running slowly. I need to get a new laptop. I need a gaming laptop that has a faster process. I need like an i7. I need like an i7 processor. This is an i5, so it doesn't handle multitasking like it should. All right, and then okay, Joya, thanks so much. We got your registration, and then you can register for both classes. That's the best value. You register for both classes for $120. That's a $300 value. Also, I think I forgot to tell you, even after the 12-week online courses are over with, you still have access to the full course once you register for it. So you can go back a year from now, 2 years from now, you can watch the entire course. So you don't lose access. Okay, I don't do that. And this information is PG-13 also, so you can use this with your children. I would say the information is PG-13. You can use this with your children as well. Okay, so in the wake of the passage of the 15th Amendment and Reconstruction, several southern states enacted laws that restricted African Americans' access to voting. And this is because they feared the power of our vote. They feared a Negro legislature. They feared what would happen when these African Americans were in charge, and now they're writing laws that a white man have to abide by, and they're getting elected into the state legislatures. Like the state legislature in South Carolina was predominantly all African American. South Carolina was one of the states that had the largest black populations in the country as well. And then when we look at Florida, for instance, where you have Governor Ron DeSantis today, and Florida needs to be desanitized. We've heard about the voter suppression laws in Florida. We see his attack on the AP African American Studies course. Okay, when we look at this right here, when you look at some history of Florida and their voter suppression, the felony disenfranchisement laws that we hear about started in Florida. Okay, I've talked about this before, and I talked about this on Faraji Muhammad's show, The Culture, and I've dealt with this on the African History Network show as well. Very briefly here, just to give you some background information, because we go through and we look at, in the second class I teach, we go through and look at history chronologically each year, year after year after year. And we look at when Reconstruction ends and these voter suppression laws that are being put in place, but they're rewriting their state's constitutions to impose poll taxes and literacy tests. And in the case of, Louisiana, property ownership requirements to be able to vote also. But if we look at this from the Brennan Center for Justice, history of Florida's felony disenfranchisement provision. History of Florida's felony disenfranchisement provision. Okay. So what Florida did was, after slavery ended, they expanded the number of crimes that were classified as felonies. In 1868, Florida dramatically expanded criminal disenfranchisement. For the first time in 1868, the state barred from the polls all people with felony convictions. For the first time in 1868, the state of Florida barred from the voting polls all people with felony convictions, while at the same time creating a host of new felony crimes. The list of disqualifying, quote-unquote, infamous crimes was expanded as well. Okay? African Americans were disproportionately franchised under the new provision because state policies at the time were designed to control newly freed slaves through the criminal justice system. Okay, so they're expanding the number of crimes that are classified as felonies. They expanded the number of crimes that are classified as felonies to then reduce how many African Americans can actually vote. And they're targeting crimes that they feel are more associated with black people as well. Now, in 1865, the Florida state legislature enacted black codes as a way to control freedom. A crucial component of the codes, of the black codes, was an expansion of the criminal justice system to deal with minor offenses that legislators believed blacks were likely to commit, and that they had been formally punished, and that had been formally punished by their masters. The black codes had their desired effect. By the 1870s to 1880s, estimates show that more than 95% of the convicts in the Florida convict camps were African American. A captain in one of the camps at the time noted, quote, "It was possible to send a Negro to prison. It was possible to send a Negro to prison on almost any pretext, but difficult to get a white man there." Now here's what Florida did in 1868 when they rewrote their state constitution. Okay. Florida disenfranchisement in the 1868 state constitution was part of a larger effort to prevent, quote unquote, to prevent a Negro legislature. This was deliberate. This was part of a larger effort to prevent a Negro legislature. Why? Because 48% of the population of Florida was made up by African Americans. And they knew that if we could vote and vote in mass, we would take over the state legislature. We would vote with people out of office that were doing us harm, and then we would pass laws that were beneficial to us, not oppress other people, but these will be laws that former slave owners would not like. So post-emancipation, legislators in Florida feared that freedmen, former slaves, freedmen, who then constituted 48% of the state's population, would take over state and local government. Okay? Now, this is one of the reasons why I tell African Americans, and I know many of us mean well and voting rights activists, things like that. Stop telling African Americans to vote to exercise their right to vote. Stop telling us that. You don't vote for exercise. If you want to exercise, you go to the gym and work out. You vote for power. This is about power. This is about understanding, writing laws and policies that are beneficial to you, your community, your people. What's good for African Americans, generally speaking, is good for America. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. They feared us having political power and utilizing that because they didn't want to have to live under the laws that African Americans were passing and writing in the law, things like that. They didn't want to have to do that. They wanted to maintain white supremacy. And for many white people, it's like that today. That's why they're Republicans. For many of them, it's like that today. Not all white people, but for many of them, it's like that today. And when you look at President Joe Biden, right? You had 81 million. He got 81 million votes. 49 million of his votes came from white people. 61% of his votes came from white people. So I'm not saying all white people. No, but it's a lot of them. Donald Trump got 74 million votes. And he had 139 traitors in the House of Representatives that voted not to certify the 2020 presidential election. There's a couple of Negroes, Byron Donalds out of Florida, and then Burgess Owens out of Utah, black Republicans. You know, a couple of brain damaged Negroes, Isaiah T. Montgomery's. Look up Isaiah T. Montgomery, you'll see why I call them that. Because that's who they are. They are. I don't know if they're descendants of Isaiah T. Montgomery, but they sure act like it. Now, the 1868 Constitution contains several provisions to prevent this from happening. For example, it established to prevent African Americans from taking over state and local government. The 1868 Constitution contains several provisions to prevent this from happening. For example, it established a state legislative apportionment scheme that inflated the representation of predominantly white counties. Let me highlight this here, right here. For example, it established a state legislative apportionment scheme that inflated the representation of predominantly white counties while deflating the representation of predominantly African American ones. It also gave the governor the power to appoint local officials, thereby preventing black majorities from electing their own leaders. So now they're changing the rules, because see, they weren't doing the same thing for white people. Okay? It also gave the governor, who was white, the power to appoint local officials for traditional offices that would be offices that were elected officials. The people vote for these. So now they're trying to take power away at the local level from a majority African American population, so the white governor could then appoint people to those positions. This has been going on for a long time. And game recognizes game. This is why we have to understand history, law, politics, and economics. Okay? So we understand how to engage in this battle and how to defeat our opponents. It also gave the governor the power to appoint local officials, thereby preventing local African American majorities from electing their own leaders. One legislator wrote that this and other such provisions were designed to prevent a Negro legislature. To prevent a Negro legislature. Because they were afraid of us taking over state legislature, local government, things like this. Felony disenfranchisement was yet another mechanism intended to suppress the political power of newly freed slaves. They didn't fear us exercising. They feared us having political power. So when we vote strategically to gain political power, gain more power, and utilize it to get laws and policies passed that are beneficial for African Americans, not to harm people, not to harm other people, but for laws and policies that are beneficial to African Americans. And what's good for us, generally speaking, is good for America. This is why we have to stop telling African Americans to exercise your right to vote. No, you vote for power. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Also, when we go vote, we don't vote for Dr. King. We don't vote for Fannie Lou Hamer. Yes, we need to study them. Yes, we stand on their shoulders. But see, once again, we have to understand the purpose of voting, what it is that we're trying to acquire. Because if you vote because of Fannie Lou Hamer, then you can just go in and vote for anybody. Okay? If you vote because Fannie Lou Hamer fought for the right to vote, you can just write in somebody's name and vote. I exercised my right to vote for Fannie Lou Hamer. She was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah, but you could be voting for somebody who would dismantle what Fannie Lou Hamer stood for and what she fought for. You could be voting for somebody who blocks voting rights bills, who votes in opposition to John Lewis, who was almost killed fighting for the 15th of fighting for the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we have to understand voting with purpose, strategy, understanding the policies that we're trying to get passed, and whose platform, whose policies will be most beneficial for us, one, and do the least amount of harm, two, who can create an environment for us to push our agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished. And one of the most important things is who will protect gains that have already been made. Who will protect those policies that are already in place, even the ones we don't know exist, that are hard-fought gains that we've made. This is understanding a whole concept that I teach called political self-defense. Political self-defense. All right. So read that from the Brennan Center for Justice, also dealing with the history of Florida's felony disenfranchisement provision. All right. And then check out this article also, because we run out of time here. Because I have to teach this class. I have to regroup and teach this class here. Who still needs to register for the new 12-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school? Let me know. Let me just post a message here. Let me know you still have to register. Read this article, How Jim Crow Era Laws Suppressed the African American Vote for Generations, from history.com. And they talk about the Mississippi State Convention of 1890, where they imposed poll taxes and literacy tests, and rewrote the state constitution. This was a state, the majority of the population of Mississippi were African Americans. The majority of the voters were African Americans. And this is what they did to suppress our vote. They feared our power. What they did became known as the Mississippi Plan, and it was adopted by other southern states as well. The Mississippi Plan, okay, is adopted by South Carolina 1895, Louisiana 1898, Alabama 1901, Oklahoma, Georgia, things of this nature. There's a good article from the Washington Post that deals with the Mississippi Plan. The Mississippi Plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. There's a direct quote from Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was the white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. This article right here from the Washington Post from May 1st, 2021. Okay, I need to close out some of these tabs here. I have about 30 tabs open here in Google Chrome. Just a second. The Mississippi Plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. Okay, read this article from Washington Post. And Solomon Saladin Calhoun said, "Let's tell the truth if it bursts the bottom of the universe. We came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer." He was the white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. The reason why you needed a Voting Rights Act of 1965 is because of what happened in 1890 in Mississippi and the rewriting of the state constitutions in these southern states. Delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and a poll tax geared to suppress the black vote in a state with a black majority. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended Reconstruction. So all these are different forms of black resistance and black resistance movements, which is has been the theme of these lectures I've been doing here in February, on Saturday on February, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time for Black History Month. And we know that black resistance is the 2023 annual theme for African American History Month, coming from ASALH, Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which is the organization that Dr. Carter G. Woodson co-founded September 9th, 1915. All right. So here's the executive summary here dealing with the theme of black resistance. The 2023. There's been a 2023 annual theme. There's been an annual theme for African American History Month since 1928. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know what the theme is. Okay, don't know there's been an annual theme. Okay, now if you have trouble logging into the online courses, email me at ahnshow@theafricanhistorynetwork.com so we can get you logged in, and also include what your name is that the course is registered under. Okay, so give me the first name, last name, give me that information, what the name that the course is registered under also. Okay, so in this 12-week online course that I teach, we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We go through and look at this history chronologically. It's very visual. I've been teaching this class since 2017, on and off. I developed the curriculum. I'm a historian. I've been studying this. It's 2023 now, so this will be my 33rd year. And we go through and look at this history chronologically that leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. But when we study the transatlantic slave trade, we can't start studying the history of slavery. We can't start in the 15th century. We have to deal with thousands of years of history that leads up to the Ma'afa, or the Great Disaster in Kiswahili, the Ma'afa, which means the Great Disaster, that leads up to it taking place. Okay, so we can't start in 1619 or the 1440s with the Portuguese. We have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, into they take the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. Okay, so some of the things that we look at here, and these are some of the slides from the course. We look at some ancient civilizations, whether we talk about Nubia, whether we talk about ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, Carthage. We look at Hannibal Barca and the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. We look at Carthage and the Carthaginians fighting against the Romans in the Punic Wars, and Carthage being destroyed in 146 BC. We look at Numidia as well. We look at the Olmecs and the Mandinka and the ancient Egyptian connection. There also we look at numerous archaeological discoveries. That's something that we're going to look at in today's class as soon as I finish broadcasting here. We're going to look at different archaeological discoveries that are causing the scientists and the paleontologists, et cetera, to push the timelines back. Okay, and they're realizing that all of this is much older than what we've been told that it is. Okay, and you know, African people are much older than what we've been told as well. We also look at the African presence in the Americas dating back at least 51,700 years ago. Okay, And the work coming from Dr. David Imhotep, who's a friend of mine, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And his book deals with the African presence dating back at least 51,700 years ago. And his book is backed up by seven peer-reviewed articles and 713 footnotes. And they found 13 different types of evidence documenting the African presence in 2004 in Allendale County, South Carolina, by Dr. Albert Goodyear. They found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. Okay, so, and these were the Khoisan, who have the oldest DNA on the planet. They're the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. They're the short-statured Africans. They go all around the world, and they were here in this land also. Okay, so this gets into the African presence that's here, that was here also, going back tens of thousands of years ago. These are two Khoisan women. The Khoisan live mainly in southern Africa in territory spanning Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. They are largely divided into two groups, hunters and gatherers, the Sans people, and the keepers of the livestock, the Khoikhoi. The Khoisan languages include the distinctive click sounds that are not found in the languages of their neighbors. Now, when we look at Indian and African mound builders, because there were about 1 million mounds in this land we call the United States of America, or what Native Americans call Turtle Island. At least 10,000 years ago, during the African Aqualithic period, the mound builders of Africa, the Proto-Manding, were building habitation mounds to live upon even before the Manding built their mounds along the Niger River. These Proto-Saharan people also built dams, boats, and mounds to escape the waters in case of flooding. There are also large erections formerly called Native American mounds, now known to be African mounds, that are shaped like pyramids that are found across North America. The largest ones surviving today are in the Mississippi Valley area. The largest of all was the Cahokia Mound near the area where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers converge. Cahokia, okay, in East Illinois, Cahokia. Now, Cyrus Thomas, director of the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian Institute's Bureau of Ethnology in 1881, said there was a race of mound builders in America distinct from the American Indians. We know there were 1 million Indian mounds in North America. Today, there are only about 100,000. Read pages 71 through 74 of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, and he breaks down this information there, okay? So we take you throughout history, and we deal with the influence here in the U.S. as well. This was called Egypt of the West. We look at like the Tekken, which was an ancient African symbol, a symbol of the resurrection of the African king Asar in the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Isis, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And there's so much that we go through and look in the class. We're also going to talk about Queen Nzinga of Matamba and the modern day Angola. We look at, and after we deal with some of the history of the Moors, and we talk about Tariq ibn Ziyad, who invades the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD. Then we have to look at Christopher Columbus and what Columbus was looking for as well, and where Columbus went to on his 4 voyages, because he never came to the land we call the United States of America. And we see how Columbus leads to the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade also, okay? And then we go through and study the transatlantic slave trade as well. All right, so any questions I did not get to? Sorry, guys, we covered a lot of information. Email me. Okay, email me, ahnshow@theafricanhistorynetwork.com, and I'll answer your questions best I can. And then also register for this 12-week online course, because We're about to get out of here right now. I have to teach the class.